Good evening. Welcome to my channel called Silver Slumbers. I'm going to help you get those soothing Z's that you deserve. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, down below in the description box, if you'd like to buy me a coffee, it would be really appreciated, as it does help me in the channel out. I thank you in advance. In today's video, I'm going to be reading True Paranormal Encounters, Volume 2. So sit back, relax, and close those eyes. But be careful. Don't get lost in the dark. In the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help me, my brother, and I become better men. And I have to say, I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures many would never get the chance to experience, and I'm thankful for every experience that life gave to me, even the scary ones. While we live in Japan, my father wanted to give us the full immersive experience, so he chose us to live in a small Japanese neighborhood off base. We live in a small little house on top of the enormous hill, in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side of a fairly large cemetery. Our particular house was set far above the monkey habitats, about a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats was nothing but thick Indiana Jones style jungle. The neighborhood kids and I would tromp through it endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. We were the only American family living in that cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese family, and it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we couldn't communicate through the language very well, we understood each other perfectly. Well, most of the time. Opposite us were an older couple with a lush garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama-san, and she had us helping her with her garden whenever she can coax us with her green tea and chocolate banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else, actually. We lived in a wonderful neighborhood. The only drawback to Mama-san's home, however, was that she directly overlooked the cemetery. And that cemetery was unlike any cemetery I've ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials don't happen very often. Instead, above-ground crypts are built. Many of them built into the sides of the hill that make up the island. The crypts are huge, made of large arcs of polished stone, set over a large square of the stone, which was a square insert cut in the middle of it for the coffin to be placed inside. Once inside the square is insert, with another piece of polished stone just inside, leaving a kind of shelf on the outside, so offerings can be made to lost loved ones. Yen, food, flowers, incense are some of the offerings given. Below Mama-san's house was a valley that swooped back into another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills are covered with these crypts, and spiderwebbing up and down through the crypts are various stone stepway paths that are very old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama-san asked me to come visit her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me as the older brother. Intrigued and a bit proud, I agreed. She took me to the back of her garden and sat me on a thick wooden bench that was carved with scenes of fishermen and men with swords, and told me she had a story to tell. Mama-san then disappeared for a few minutes, and soon she returned with a tray and held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colors of the evening sky as the sun began to lower. Mama-san said that she had seen me, my brother and some kids daring each other to follow a stair pathway down into the cemetery. You have to understand, the path from our little home area down to the cemetery consists of hundreds of steps, many broken or cracking, in and out of bushes and at a steep incline. It would be dangerous for anyone, but the real test was seeing how long we would take walking through the crypts at night. Mama-san wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. Many years ago, during the war, Americans were thought to be the devils, monsters that would murder innocent civilians for no reason other than to kill. That fear was a product of wartime propaganda used to encourage young men to military service and farmers to fight alongside them. But many didn't. Many ran, and with nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens curled themselves off the cliffside rather than to face the tortures of the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified at hearing this. I had no idea that this happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness I started to cry. The sun was setting, and the sky went from pink into a deep blue, orange, and red. Mama-san reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry, and the past is something we always try to remember, so that we can never go back. She went on with her story. One young woman had followed through with this sacrifice with her 2 children, but she survived the fall. She was in a coma for months. When she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realize that she was not with her children. They had been buried somewhere in that cemetery below, in an unmarked crypt that held by many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain, the torment of her loss unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say she never found her children. Her act of offering herself doomed to her purgatory. She will remain tortured for eternity. The sun had disappeared. The cemetery drowned into inky blackness. The main path dotted with dim, broken light, feebly illuminating small areas. Mama-san continued. She still wanders the cemetery. She said, looking for her kids. You can hear her crying. And then she pointed down. I didn't want to, but I did. I looked. In the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, there was a white figure. At first a bright white shimmer, moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side, like it was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. Softly at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but Mama-san held my hand and whispered that she wouldn't come up there. We were too far, but that is why we shouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to stay away. It's best to pray for her. Mama-san said she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she will find her salvation. Needless to say, I never went down to that cemetery. Not once. And I never sat back there with Mama-san ever again. It was enough for me. However, I did visit that cliff with the hill. It's called Peace Prayer Park. Now, out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there. I prayed for the souls and for their forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories, sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people are overwhelming. I'll never forget the time there. I like to go back to see if she's still there, wandering the graves, looking for her children. It all started when I was a kid during summer, and because of what happened, it made me hate it whenever I go visit my grandparents in summer vacation. The reason why I hate seeing them during the summer is simple. Bad things happen. My grandparents' house isn't that old, but old enough. Around the house is this kind of gravel moat. They have put gravel and pebbles around on all 4 walls of the place. It's a really nice looking house. That's not the problem, by the way. In fact, most of the time, the house is just a house. But when certain conditions are met, strange things happen. Let me explain. Basically, something creepy happens when it rains. Whenever it rains, it sounds like someone is walking around the house all through the night. You can hear the sounds of someone's footsteps crunching on the gravel, slowly going around and around in a seamlessly ending loop. I used to get so scared when I was a kid. I would go running to my grandma and grandpa in tears. I am much older now, and recently, my grandpa passed away, and my grandma then began living with my aunt, which meant that no one was going to be living in my grandparents' house anymore. It also meant that we need to go back and start clearing the house out. They were getting the house ready for sale, and naturally, I was asked to help. The gas and water was shut off, so after a hard day of shifting boxes in the summer sun, I couldn't even take a shower. I head into town because I knew of a place where I can wash up. I had dinner in town too. There was a load more to do the following day, so the plan was to stay overnight. My dad was supposed to stay too, but I saw how much the cleaning and heavy lifting had taken out of him, so I said that it would be fine if I were to finish the job myself in the morning. From about 9 p.m. that night, the heavens opened and rain came flooding down. I knew what I was going to be in for later. Luckily, the electric was still on, so I saved from staggering around the house with a flashlight. The internet was out though. I guess that the only sensible thing I could do was to get some sleep. I didn't like being in this big empty house by myself. It reminded me of all those years ago when I would run to Grandma and Grandpa whenever I got scared. But they weren't here this time. I felt like I didn't know the house well enough to be comfortable here alone. There. And without the distraction of the internet, I found it even harder to relax. I should have picked up a couple of beers in town. I was lying in bed listening to the rain outside. It seemed to be getting worse. I thought that I could just focus on the rain, that I would fall asleep, but I was wrong. I was tossing and turning in bed, but I lay static when I heard a familiar sound. The sound of someone walking on the gravel outside the house. To be honest, my first reaction was, "Oh, you again, huh?" Now that I was older, I didn't need to run away in fear. I could lay there and listen a little. I tried to tap into the logical side of my brain to figure out what the hell that was. I mean, it could be possible that it was a wild animal, maybe rats or a leaky gutter or something. I couldn't convince myself though. To me, it definitely sounded like footsteps. I listened closer and learned something new. It sounded like as if these footsteps would take pauses to stop, and then a moment later, they would start up again. Since I couldn't sleep, I thought that I would try and see if my mom was still up. She has always been a bit of a night owl. Luckily, she was still up. I asked her about Grandma and Grandpa's. "Hey, do you know if they had any trouble with rats or anything like that around here?" My mom knew what I was talking about. She said something like, "All these years later, and you can still hear those noises?" I said that I could. She said that she remembered a time when she was younger. Her sisters apparently hated so much that she pleaded with my grandparents to be sent to a boarding school. I always wonder why one went to boarding school and the other didn't. I thought it was down to favoritism. My mom said that if I want to know more, I should speak to my aunt because she never heard any of these footsteps when it rained. I said goodbye and I lay in bed, contemplating on calling my aunt. I listened to the heavy rain and those stilt footsteps circling around the house and decided that I need to ask her. I called my aunt and we spoke about the mysterious footsteps. We got onto the new thing I discovered. When I said that the footsteps stopped and then started again, she asked me what I thought it was. I said something along the lines of, I don't know, maybe whoever those footsteps belong to is looking for something and that's why they can't go away. I was beyond rats and gutter noise theories at this point. I was willing to consider the paranormal. She said, nice idea, but that's not what I thought. I checked myself. The footsteps stop at the windows. Whoever it is trying to look inside. They're not looking for something that they have lost. They're looking for a person. Well, I didn't sleep that night. I just did my work and got out into the morning. I never returned, and I'm glad I didn't. I still think about Grandma and Grandpa's house whenever it rains. Heavily, though. So, I've been debating on if I should post this, but I'm starting to get really freaked out and figured it couldn't hurt asking for help. Now, I will warn you all, English is not my first language. I am French Canadian, but moved to the US about 3 years ago. So if my grammar or spelling is off, I am sorry. So I live in a pretty rural area in Michigan, close to the lake, and I'm currently living alone. Both my parents are currently in Canada, taking care of my great uncle, who is in his late 80s, and they have been gone for a month or so, and probably won't be back until late December. I am currently 19 years old, just old enough to be by myself. But some really odd things happened in the last 2 weeks, so I started back in September when my 15-year-old cat named Ginger Snap went missing. At first, I figured she had passed away since she was very old and had a few health problems anyway. A few days later, I found her body completely torn to shreds on my back porch. I mean, she was severely mutilated to the point where I had to throw up while sobbing hysterically. I came to the conclusion that it must have been birds of prey, since we have big owls and hawks in my area. A few days passed, and on October 4th, something odd also happened. I was watching TV around 11 p.m., and I kept hearing a really fast knocking sound. It would come in sets of 5 and then stop for a second, then restart. I ended up going outside to investigate, and I couldn't see anyone. But there was this really horrible smell. Then what really happened last night. So I had waken up around 3:30 in the morning, which happens sometimes if I had a really messed up dream. So I walked down the hall to get a drink and probably watch some TV. Once I got to go to the fridge, which is right next to the back porch, I heard someone walking around. I froze up, coming, and staying completely still. I looked over to the door and saw a huge shadow. It was a kind of crouching on his hands, all fours. I don't really think it saw me, but it did look human. I didn't move for like a whole 3 minutes before the shadow moved. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. Just gone. I ran back to my room and called the cops. But when they got here, they couldn't find anything. But told me that there was no one back there since our back porch is suspended about 15 feet in the air. And there was no ladder. I am super freaked out because I'm completely alone up here. I don't know much about the supernatural outside the stranded werewolves and vampires, so any tips would be deeply appreciated. So, at work today, my coworker and I, we'll call him Joey, we were talking about paranormal stuff that we've experienced. I told him my many but minor occurrences. He says he's going to tell me the craziest thing that's ever happened to him. I'm going to type out most of this as much as I can in his point of view, as I think it'll be less confusing. This is not word for word, but this is best I can remember. So, this is Joey's story. So, this is one time I was hanging out with my buddy Aaron. We went to smoke weed by the lake. We were in my car and we each hit off a joint. I tried to pass it back to him, but he was just staring straight ahead and began to like be perfectly still. I said, "Hey." And as he turns his head towards me, his face was strange. Like I could see his bones protruding, and his skin is dark, like gray, almost black. It's just really weird. I really didn't think much of it because we did acid the day before. I say, "Dude, you okay, bro?" And he starts shaking like he's having a seizure. The car door opens and he falls out. I get out of the car, walk around to his side. I reach out to him and touched him. And it's like he just woke up. He's like, "What happened? Where am I?" I don't really think much of this again because I really thought I might just be feeling the acid from the day before. A year passes. Aaron is doing drugs like crazy ever since and overdoses. Dies at the scene. First responders managed to resuscitate him. Joey says that a few weeks after the overdose, Aaron calls him and asks if he wants to hang out. Joey agrees. So I go over to this dude's house and he's acting weird off the bat. Like, really weird. I finally say, "Hey, I know what happened. We live in a small town and if you need to talk, we can talk." He says, "I do need to talk to you. There is a reason I asked you over." He proceeds to pull out a folded up piece of paper. He says that on the day that he died, he was brought back. He found this letter on his pocket. It wasn't there before the OD, but it was there after. I unfold the paper, and it's in a language that I can't read. It looks like it was written in blood. He lets me take the letter with me. I don't know what to think of the letter, but this guy I work with, Big Mike, he's older than me and gives good advice. I decide I'm going to tell him about the letter. I've been thinking about how to tell the story for days every time I go to work. So I walked up to him. He says, "I need to tell you something." Like he knows somehow that I've been planning this. I say, "You go ahead because mine's a bit crazy and you won't believe it anyways." And he proceeds to tell me this. Big Mike said, "About 20 years ago, my mother passed away. I was with her when it happened. When she died, an angel, or whatever you call it, appeared before me and showed me things. Visions, I guess. But it showed me you, Joey. You were with someone who bears the name of your brother. Joey's brother is named Aaron. You were near a body of water. You were in a car. Your friend turned their head to you, and it was the face of the devil. He falls out of the car. You go around the car. Your hand glows white with light. You touched your friend, and the evil in him leaves. But not permanently. I always said I thought I knew you from somewhere. Now I know. I don't remember any of this for 20 years until this morning." Joey says that he lured his pastor to the letter and the entire story afterwards. The incident at the lake, the overdose, the letter, the big things that Mike said. The pastor was alarmed at all of this and sends the letter away to be translated. Letter gets translated. The letter speaks of a struggle between the light and the dark. Joey and Aaron are named specifically in the letter. The pastor decides an exorcism for Aaron, and it's necessary. Aaron apparently learns of the plan and skips out of state for months. Since this was a private affair, handled by a local clergy, basically when the dude skips town, it all gets dropped and forgotten. Apparently the guy came back to town later, and Joey is still apparently friends with Aaron to this day. Not like they're still hanging out, but he sees him around and still considers him a friend. I was like, "What? Is he still possessed?" He says, "Dude, I don't know. If this story is true, it doesn't feel over." He tells me he never went back to the church or anything after this. I made him question reality. How could someone start telling him a story he'd never told anyone? This is an outlandish story, but who the hell would make this up unless it They're writing a damn novel. I know Joey. He's a stoner. He's got a weird past, but he's not a liar, from what I know. And he doesn't seem, honestly, creative enough to make that up. But that is my highlight for work today. When I was around 10 years old, my grandfather passed away, leaving the old family home to my mother. It was one of those old Victorian homes. Been in my family for well over 100 years. The house came with a plot of land in the back that at the point was basically a forest of trees. Me, being 10 years old with a huge imagination, decided it'd be the best place to go exploring. As I was exploring, I ran into another girl. I say hello and ask her name, and asked if she lived around here. She said her name was Kay, and she said her house was close to here. This made me happy to have another kid around my age to play with. I asked her if she wanted to play, and she agreed. From then on, for a whole year, Kay and I have been best friends and played together after school and on weekends. The only problem was Kay only wanted to play in the forest and wouldn't want to go anywhere else. But then again, I was happy. I was happy to have a friend, so I didn't question it. But then my other grandfather got sick and was given less than a year to live. Our family moved back to be with him for his final days. He actually lived for another year and a year after that before we lost him. After a while, my parents and I moved back home. But when I got back, Kay never came over. Days went by, and then weeks and months, and no Kay. Eventually, I moved on and figured that she moved away. It wasn't until 15 years later I realized who Kay really was. My parents decided to move into a retirement community and left the house to me and my fiance. About a week into moving in, I was going through some old family photos, and when I got to a picture of my mother, grandfather, and grandmother, and another girl. But it wasn't just any girl. It was Kay. I was sure of it. I was completely freaked out. I took the photo to my mother and asked her to explain, not mentioning that she looked like my old friend. My mother sighed and said she never wanted me to know, but her family had a dark past. The girl in the photo was Catherine, my mother's sister, who went missing when she was around 10 years old. No sign of her had ever been found. Even over 20 years later, it was suspected that a family member who committed suicide not long after her disappearance was at fault. This messed with me for a while, but I tried my best to move on. But then we had the wildfires that burned down most of the forest in our backyard. Thankfully, our house had minimal damage, but the forest was toasty. Literally. We decided to clear out the land, which results in a terrifying find. While digging up one of the tree trunks, one of the workers found bones. Human bones. The police were called, and they did their police stuff, and determined that the body belonged to Catherine. They determined that she died not after she went missing. Is this why Catherine only wanted to play in the trees? Could she not leave, or did she want me to find her body? Or if so, why didn't she just tell me? What do you guys think? Tonight, I'm babysitting two kids, 3 and 6 years old. I see them daily as they go into their home daycare, right next door to my house. Tonight, I'm watching them at their house, which I've been doing for a few times before with no issues. The family is super normal. Really nice mom and dad, big house, 2 sweet kids. Basically, nothing strange ever stood out to me or anything about this family. When I first got here today, they told me that the 3-year-old had a long day and was tired. Sure enough, within a half hour of me being there, he fell asleep on the couch, so I carried him to his bed, and from there, I've been sitting and hanging out with the 6-year-old for a few hours. She's been on her iPad basically the whole time. Me on my laptop. We've been there in the living room for about 2 hours. Her on the couch and me on the recliner. It's been completely silent, other than random noises on her iPad. All of a sudden, the lamp next to me shut off on its own. At first, I didn't think any of it. I figured maybe it was motion activated or it was on a timer or something. Then all of a sudden, the little girl looked up from her iPad, stares at the lamp for a few seconds, and whispers, "Okay." She then gets up, closes the blinds, then walks over to me and whispers, "It's time to go in the other room." And so I asked her if the lamp always does that, and she shook her head, "No," and looked at me very seriously. I asked her why she closed the blinds and why we had to go in the other room, and she basically just said, "It's just time." So I'm sufficiently creeped out. She won't answer any of my questions, but she's just acting so serious, like too serious for a 6-year-old. Not to mention that this is very unlike her personality. She's usually silly and dancing around and other stuff like that. I still have a few hours left with her, so wish me luck, y'all. So this is the final update. The younger child woke up 5 times screaming. In the screaming moments, I left this room and I sat in with him the rest of the night. I explored the house a bit. It's huge. I found a ton of weird rooms with like small weird doors that are just used for storage. I don't know if this is relevant, but when I brought the girl up to her bed, I realized that there was a small door at the end of the bed near the wall, and there was like a whole room in there that you can just go inside and explore. But it was just filled with boxes. The parents came home, and I told them about the lamp, which they agreed was very strange. I didn't want to tell them about the little girl acting up, because I figured it wasn't fair to freak him out too. But based on the reaction of the lamp, I strongly got the vibe that strange things happen in their house maybe isn't so strange. Oh, and lastly, also, it looks like a base. The house. It was built around the 1950s, but I think more has been added to it fairly recently. So tell me, guys, what do you think about this story? I have an 8-month-old son, Michael. He was conceived within a day or two of my mom passing away last June. He was a premature baby. Anyways, as many parents know, at this age they are crawling and putting everything in their mouths. Well, a rich relative of mine gave me a bunch of new clothes, and I was upstairs in my bedroom hanging up, folding up new stuff. Many shirts come with an extra button in a little bag attached to the garment, so that if you lose a button, you can just sew an extra one that they give you. Michael was crawling around, and I noticed that he had a little piece of paper on his hand. So I picked him up and grabbed it. That's when I heard a whisper, or something behind me, saying, "Mouth." Michael had the button in the little bag in his mouth. If he would have swallowed that, he most certainly would have choked, possibly even died or needed to be taken to the hospital. I had no reason to think to check his mouth. He wasn't chewing or anything I could see. Whoever that voice was certainly could have saved my baby. I like to think that was my mom, his little guardian angel, and watching over him. As this isn't the first time that this happened. A similar incident happened with a rubber band in his mouth. I also want to add what I said in the comments. My mother's ashes and my son's paternal grandmother's ashes are both in the house, so it could be either one of them. However, my mom died within days of my son's conceptions, and my estimate due date was my mother's birthday. I had him early, so he didn't end up being born the same date, but still, because of that, I've always thought my mom and son would have some kind of connection. This happened about 4 years ago, while I was hunting in the mountains of northeast United States. There was fresh snow on the ground, and there were supposed to be flurries later in the afternoon. It was a great day to be out until the flurries came. It wasn't flurries, it was a whiteout, and I couldn't see within 10 yards in front of me. I started making my way towards what I thought was the direction of a large pack of dense pine trees to the east of me, but I can't see. I was wrong, and at this point, I'm lost in a snowstorm, and it's almost dark. I reach in my bag and pull out my flashlight, and it's dead. I look for my spare batteries and forgot my pack of batteries. At this point, I'm panicking a bit. I don't know where I'm at, and I'm starting not to be able to see, so I figured the guys back at the cabin would just start searching for me around 9:30 p.m. It wasn't around 8:45 p.m., and I figure I'm going to build a fire so they could see me when they come. Everything was wet, so it took forever to start a fire, but I got one lit. I sat there until 1:30 in the morning and realized that I was nowhere near where I went hunting, and the guys couldn't find me. I'm panicking now because I don't have proper gear to be out all night. The temperature's dropping rapidly, and even with my hunting gear and fire, I'm freezing. Just when I think all hope is lost, I see a dim light in the distance, and it's moving away from me. I quickly put out the fire and start heading towards this light, assuming that it's another hunter walking on a trail. The light is about 400 yards from where I'm at. I walk and walk and walk for about 2 hours, and I've realized I've been following this light, but there's no tracks in the ground, just pure white snow. As a desperate chance to get this guy to slow down, I yell out, "Hey, I'm lost. Could you slow down?" No answer. I continued to follow the light until I stopped for about 150 yards in front of me. I kept walking. The closer I got, the brighter it got. I was about 30 yards away, and I said, "Hey man, the light, it's too damn bright. Can you turn it off?" The light went out. No one was standing there. The road and my vehicle was right there. Was this a guardian angel or someone that had gotten lost and didn't get so lucky? I hope you enjoy these true paranormal encounters. If you made it this far, I wanted to thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy these stories. If you are asleep, well, maybe you can hear me in your dream world, and I'll let you listen to the rain. Enjoy the slumber world.